This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. 2.5 Admins, episode 297. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is compensating for RAM constraints with L2 Arc on ZFS.
Yeah, with the price of RAM continuing to be insane, we look at how you can maybe use a bit less RAM and more L2 Arc and get most of the performance.
It's always fun telling everybody how to do the thing that you've been telling them is a bad idea for the last 15 years.
Yeah, well, the trade-offs weren't worth it before, but all the economics have kind of changed.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. How Jennifer Aniston and friends cost us 377 gigabytes and broke ext4 hard links. This is a post on the Discourse blog.
Okay, so before we get started, I'm pretty sure that a lot of our listeners heard the wrong thing. This is not Discord, the instant messaging service. This is Discourse, which is forum software. In fact, it's the software that I run for Practical ZFS. And the issue that led them to discover this hard link limit is that every time a user wants to upload an attachment to a forum post in Discourse, for example, an animated GIF.
GIF.
All right, Joseph, it's GIF and I'll fight you. Anyway, when somebody goes to upload a GIF, it gets saved as a new file on the server. It doesn't matter if somebody else has already used that file before. It's a new upload. It's a new file. If you're running a relatively small forum like Practical ZFS, this is unlikely to cause you any, massive issues going forward. But if you've got a really, really big forum, you might discover that in some cases you're hosting more than 250,000 copies of the same 1.6 megabyte GIF file.
Which is what happened to one of Discourse's customers for their hosted platform.
Precisely. And so as Discourse is backing up this managed forum, they're noticing how long it takes and how much data, and they're like, this is ridiculous. Where is all this coming from? Let's take a look. And that's when they discovered that, for example, there were 270-something thousand copies of the same GIF of Jennifer Aniston jumping up and down doing a little happy dance. And so they thought, how can we solve this? Well, hard links. Hard links work great for this. We just need to write the file one time, and we hard link to it lots of times. That way we have different metadata entries pointing to the same actual blocks that contain the file. So instead of 276,000 times 1.6 megs, we maybe got 276,000 4K sectors.
Which seemed like a pretty good win, right? Until...
It's an incredible win unless you're paying really close attention as your backups go by and all of a sudden you notice a whole bunch of errors scrolling by. Now, the good news here is that the way their backup software handled this error when ext4, threw a hissy fit at trying to have the 65,536th hard link to the same GIF is it just backed up the file in full. So after the first 64K worth of files, the rest of the GIFs were just backed up as regular files the way they always had been. And then after a little bit of analysis, they could figure out, okay, we need to actually respect the limit. And they started out doing a little research and figuring out, okay, well, we know ext4 has this 64K limit, but what about XFS? What about ZFS? Different file systems are likely to have different upper limits for this. So they finally solved the problem in what I think was what I would have done to solve this problem the very first time, which is not like a research what the limit is and, write a loop to break and, do a new upload, and rebase on that one every time. But instead just watch for the error coming back from the file system. And that tells you, okay, now I need to do a new full upload of this file and rebase the rest of my hard links on that one until that one starts complaining. That way, not only does it work for ext4 and ZFS and XFS and whatever today, that same code should work well with any arbitrary file systems in the future. Hey, Alan, what's the upper hard link limit on Bcachefs? Do you know?
Bcachefs, I don't know. But I know on ZFS on Linux, it is 2 billion. And on FreeBSD, it's like 18 quintillion.
Right, so not a problem then.
Yeah, so basically what they did was by having 4 copies of the file, each linked 65,000 times, they managed to deduplicate their 246,000 copies of this file and only use a couple of megabytes of space.
Dad stuck in support nightmare after teen lied about age on Discord. This is quite the tale, and I couldn't even keep track of it. There were so many twists and turns in this, but the bottom line is that, yeah, Discord is a nightmare to deal with in terms of support.
From a technical perspective, the twists and turns don't really matter. They're essentially the same set of twists and turns. You've heard me ranting at great length about trying to get back into Office 365 and Google accounts that have been locked out, with no working MFA. It's the same runaround. We'll log in to open a ticket. Well, I can't log in to open a ticket. Yes, well, okay. Well, to fix that, log in to open a ticket. And, nobody you can call, and AI stuff that also tries to route you to, static pages that tell you it's all the same garbage. None of that's really different. The reason I think this was worth reporting separately is because it touches on to another issue that's rather prevalent in this day and age online, which is age gating. I mean, that's what this is about. A teen, and if I recall correctly, her father knew about it, lied about her age because it was the only way to get what she wanted and what she believed and what her family thought, was okay for her to participate in this social media network. This is very common practice. I have lied about every single one of my children's ages on YouTube because by default, when you create, a kid YouTube account, if you're honest about the age, they can't get onto real YouTube until they're freaking teenagers, man. If you have a reasonably bright 9-year-old and you tell them to go watch YouTube Kids, let me tell you what, there's nothing on YouTube Kids targeted to 9-year-olds. That's all like Baby Shark stuff. It's awful. That's not the only example, but it's one of many examples to why, I, as a parent, have lied about my children's ages to break through age gates. I don't know how many times, because much like the MFA nonsense, again, these are broad, sweeping policies that are just being applied in a really knee-jerk way, and they're not taking people's individual needs into account. It just doesn't work out well.
Yeah, so in this case, an attacker did the typical I'm tech support scam and took over the girl's account and then specifically used it to target the same scam against all the other young girls that were her friends on Discord, and trying to get a ticket from the outside to say, hey, this account's been hijacked, and the ticket immediately gets closed and say, report it from inside the app. It's like, well, we're locked out of the app because they've taken over our account. And they were just like, computer says no. There's no humans in this loop. There's no way to escalate this. There's no way to talk to anyone. If the AI robot doesn't match you to one of our 6 knowledge base articles, you're just shit out of luck. Bye.
Oh, don't worry. The AI will absolutely match you to one of those knowledge base articles. There just won't be anything useful in it. None of it will be applicable to your situation. That is a good point. That is another thing that does distinguish this one is just that element of, predation. Using this child's account to target other children on the platform was bad, but the other thing there I think that's probably worth noting is that, the breaking through the age gate was part of their issue with getting the teens access restored. It wasn't only difficulty in getting access restored to a compromised account. It was also some difficulty in determining, again, the kid had lied about their age or the parent had lied about it for them, and that broke policies, and they were angry about that. And
the parents were pretty savvy. They got in touch with Ars Technica and got them on side, and that put pressure on Discord to actually get this sorted out.
Suddenly, you have a path to a human.
Yeah, without Ars's involvement, they'd probably still be locked out.
Yeah, that's a thing that has just become increasingly true. There is a different set of rules for the 900-pound gorillas than normal people. I can't tell you how many times I have seen issues that could only be solved by somebody with enough name recognition and clout to be like, oh, we don't want to piss him off. Sometimes I've been that guy, for a while there I worked for Ars Technica, and I could be the guy wielding the Ars hammer. I beat up a couple of power companies pretty freaking hard with that absolutely wanted no part of fixing issues, including saving all their customer passwords in plain text, and everybody at the power company being able to just see their password, just clicking on it with the application they were using. And the power company's, initial response was, absolutely, fuck you. This is what we're doing. This is what we want to do. We're not going to do anything different. You can't make us. But, then you publish an article on front page Ars Technica, and tunes tend to change after that.
Yeah, like over here I see, especially people have problems with their bank or an airline, and they just get told, yeah, no, go away. And then you contact the national news, and suddenly it's like, we can't comment about specific consumer cases, but the news is like, yeah, but we heard that suddenly the problem got solved.
That is one thing that I really miss about old school Twitter. Old school Twitter, when it was generally speaking okay, that was another way that you could become the 900-pound gorilla. If you had 4,000-ish followers and you had like an obvious, this company is being a dumbass problem that you could post in a humorous way on Twitter, once you break about that 4,000 follower range, like you go and light them up on Twitter and they will actually pay attention in a way that you cannot get that same company to pay attention from you calling them or writing letters or, complaining to the Better Business Bureau or whatever. But we don't have that anymore. At least not until the new and enlightened business world in which all the companies have a presence that they monitor and participate in on the Fediverse.
Dare to dream.
Any day now.
I found an interesting article on the Register recently called Apple's Last Tower Topples and the Others Will Follow. And it's about how the Mac Pro has been discontinued. And the kind of thesis of this piece is that over time, computers have had more and more stuff integrated onto the motherboard, the CPU, and ultimately the SoC, to the point where tower computers are effectively obsolete at this point or will be very soon. And I feel like you guys might push back on that a little bit.
I wish I could, but this has been coming for a long freaking time. Computing as we know it, the tower computing, or just in general purpose computing, where you can start out with a motherboard and a socketed CPU and RAM and drives and GPUs and network cards, like that's never really been something that was going to survive as a mainstream interest. It's too complicated. It's too engineering and nerdy. There is a very large segment of humans that enjoys that kind of thing, but it's a subset. It's not a majority.
Yeah, like I think the kind of enthusiast computer that you kind of build yourself, in the past, it was kind of every computer was like that, but maybe somebody did it for you. But now I think we will start to see computers again turning into more of an appliance where you buy a thing and you never look inside, or no user serviceable parts inside. While it may not become impossible to still get a tower that you can build yourself, I think to Joe's point that there will be less of that in the future. And that'll become a bit harder to find and probably a bit more expensive, and may, for some people, not be worth it. But I hope it doesn't go away entirely, because all of my computers have been built that way. And I, most of the time, appreciate it, but maybe I don't leverage it that much either. Like I don't tear my computer apart and put in different add-in cards nearly as much as I did 20 years ago.
In a lot of ways, this is basically the tragedy of the commons. Things can't survive the mainstream if they're not targeting mainstream humans. So you're not going to get an engineering pastime that survives becoming mainstream, because in order to become mainstream, it inevitably has to lose the thing that we as the techie, engineering, nerdy types valued about it in the first place. General purpose computing has never been a comfortable business model for either side of it. Once again, you start talking about the mainstream. Well, mainstream consumers don't want something as nebulous as a general purpose computer. They want to know what the thing they got is good for and how to use it for the thing that it's good for, and they want to use it for that thing. Then from the other side, companies that want to sell to the mainstream, well, they kind of have the same issue. They don't want a nebulous product that maybe you can figure something good to do with, or maybe you can't. They want to know exactly what this thing is for, and they want to know how to get their hooks into you so that they can make you want to use the thing for its purpose and buy it and hopefully continue buying more of them.
But what about gamers, right? Because if you look at where we are with integrated SoCs at the moment, like what Apple are doing, what AMD are doing, they've got pretty powerful graphics, right? And they can do reasonable gaming, but there are gamers who want to do high-end, like 4K games with really expensive NVIDIA and AMD cards that these SoCs can't compete with. Are you trying to tell me that those graphics cards are just not going to be around much longer?
Yes, because that kind of gaming has been slowly, not even all that slowly, I mean, it's been gradually, steadily eaten into by console gaming for, the last couple decades. First-person shooters will never again be what they were in the late 90s and early 2000s in the PC scene because the console industry basically killed them. And even then, you start seeing again, this devolution to the lowest common denominator. You get into the consoles, and the console does specialize for the exact thing that you're talking about. You want the AAA gaming, you want the super high polygon count, you want everything to look super glitzy, you want it to be easy to use. That's what consoles are for. The other thing that consoles do is they take away that pesky skill-based issue with first-person shooters. I'm not saying there's no skill required to play a first-person shooter on a console. Obviously, that's not true. However, the level of skill that you need with a mouse and keyboard and no auto-aim, no, that got done away with in favor of the easy-to-hold, all-in-one controller with the little thumbsticks that aren't really accurate enough to hold up with mouse and keyboard for precision, and that's why everybody got a free aimbot.
Yeah, but if you look at modern consoles, those are literally just a specialized PC. They help the game manufacturer by everybody having exactly the same amount of RAM, a model of GPU and CPU. But, most of them are just a glorified, AMD or similar processor and a graphics card. But yeah, I think we will see more dedicated appliances like that and less a computer that does a bunch of different things.
Well, I was going to push back on what Jim said about how, it's super niche and consoles are taking over by saying, well, Valve will disagree with you. They are doing very good business. They're a very profitable company. In fact, per employee, I think they make more than a few of the big tech companies combined because it's a really small team and they've got a pretty simple business model.
Sure, but most of that revenue is from being an online store, not from making video games.
What you just described actually was a niche industry, Joe. You talked about how profitable they are because they can do what they're doing with fewer employees because it's a very specialized service targeting a well-understood niche. Now, are you willing to compare the revenue of Valve, for instance, with Microsoft Gaming?
Well, no. And also, to really shit on my point, look what Valve are doing. The Steam Deck is essentially a console. I mean, yeah, it's a PC, but again, it's an SoC. It's not got upgradable RAM or anything.
And you play it with a controller, right?
Yeah, and look what they would like to do. If it wasn't for the hardware price gouging, we would have probably the Steam machine by now, which again is a PC.
So is the Xbox.
I push back on that because, we haven't seen this Steam machine yet, but when it does come out, you will be able to install whatever you want on it, whatever, Linux, FreeBSD.
That's just a less locked down thing, but it doesn't make an Xbox any less a PC. It's an AMD CPU and a GPU, and it just runs specialized software and is locked down with Secure Boot and so on. It's not that it's not a PC.
It's just everything getting squeezed down into more tightly defined categories. Any modern gaming console is effectively a PC. It's a PC that runs a particular operating system and has a much more tightly defined workload than a general purpose PC, but that's what we've been talking about this whole time. The idea of the everything box that you build for your workload, that you get to custom tailor it and architect it and pick out the pieces and decide what it does and when and how, that's exactly the thing that was never going to be mainstream for humanity and is going away as the mainstream discovers what they can get out of computing. Well, it makes the things that we want more expensive.
Is an iPhone a PC then?
Yes.
Right. So you just mean literally personal computer?
Well, no, at this point, all the consoles are x86. It's the same CPU architecture as a PC. It's not just that it's running an operating system or something. It's literally it's a PC with some lockdown software on it. It is the same kind of CPU and RAM and disk and GPU that you would have in your PC if you built it yourself. They're just soldered together.
Is a MacBook Pro a PC? Yes, and that's not x86, so...
Well, no, but ARM is just an alternative to that at this point. The same thing goes for the iPhone. You can get ARM PCs if you want.
Yeah, Qualcomm laptops, right? You can get a PC running Windows that's ARM, yeah.
Yeah. I think the real point here is that whether we're talking about ARM or x86 or God help us all, PowerPC, it doesn't much matter, because when we talk about consoles, or when we talk about smartphones, or when we talk about tablets, this is all general purpose computing infrastructure that has been very tightly locked down to no longer be general purpose in the way it's presented to the end user. But your CPU in your incredibly tightly locked down iPhone started out as a general purpose CPU. It could have been a Mac. It could have, been a Linux box. It could have been anything. The restriction isn't really in what the hardware is capable of doing. It's in what the company that produced the actual entire product wanted to narrow it down to. And again, what we see is that most people want very, very, very tightly defined products, and most companies want to sell them because it's easier to sell those tightly defined products to larger numbers of people, rather than saying like, look, it's great, find your own fun, figure it out, but trust us, you want it. Which is ultimately kind of what you're left with when you're selling general purpose hardware.
It's funny you say that about the iPhone SoC, because they literally took an iPhone SoC, put it in a laptop form factor, and sold it as the MacBook Neo. So yeah, you're completely right.
Yeah, well, they weren't the first to do that, right? Qualcomm did that with a tablet processor as the Windows ARM PC.
And we had the one ARM-powered Surface. And yeah, I mean, none of this is anything new. Again, general purpose CPUs, they're good for general purpose things unless you very tightly lock them down with software to make sure that you're only doing the one thing.
I mean, what you are describing here, what you're setting out, is a grim future for Linux users.
Unfortunately, yes. Now, this is a cycle. I don't think any of this is permanent, but I think we were fortunate enough to live through a golden era of widely distributed, widely available in terms of source computing. I think we were fortunate enough to live through, well, really the first possible golden era of such a thing. But yeah, it has been drawing to a close for quite some time, and it's going to get worse, and then eventually it's going to get better again.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of this is what happens on the server side. Not so much for servers when you're buying new, but especially, as we've talked about in many episodes, people kind of repurposing old enterprise hardware as their home lab. And now we're starting to see things where the motherboard has a special socket in it, and that's where the NIC goes. You don't have it in a regular PCIe slot. It's an AOM on the motherboard. And weird things like that are just like non-standard form factors for the motherboard, right? Nothing's, Ultra ATX anymore. We're getting all these weird shapes and things that are specific to one use case or one physical chassis, then all these kind of odd form factors. And as we see servers kind of specialize in the same way, are we going to be left with a lot more e-waste and a lot less computers that can be repurposed for a different purpose, because they went from being a general purpose device to being a specific appliance for doing this one thing and this one thing only.
Well, yeah, I mean, you two must have had boxes that only had, say, 10100 Ethernet, and then you could just buy a PCIe card, or maybe even a PCI card, stick it in, and get gigabit.
Of course. Mm-hmm. When I got started with PC-compatible computers, because, of course, this kind of really wide, morphing and changing of the underlying device really wasn't possible in like the 8-bit era that I really got my original start in. But once I got into the PC compatible era, I would say for the first 10 years or so, the only way I ever got anything new was, upgrading piece by piece. I never bought like as much computer as I could possibly afford, and that's the computer that I used until I bought the next one. No, I put together some piece of crap, and, then the next month I would find a better card to replace something with, and, then a few months after that, and it's basically the computer of Theseus. Now, I did eventually sit down with an actual no-kidding calculator and do some actual no-kidding math and discover that while what I was doing felt more comfortable to my wallet because I never had two nickels to rub together at any given time, I was in fact spending more money to have less average computing power than if I had just been buying the best computer I could and using it pretty much as it was until the next forklift upgrade several years later. I could get more computer and spend less money that way. And so I started doing things that way and not doing as many in-place upgrades. But yeah, that was fundamental to my experience.
Yeah, same for mine. Like when I was in high school, every one of my upgrades was a 3 or 4 step affair that involved, okay, so I get some new hardware and upgrade some components in my computer. And then those old components go to like my dad's computer and upgrade his thing. And then his leftover old components get combined with, some other components. And we make a whole new computer to sell to someone who doesn't even have a computer at all right now. And it was this like trickle down thing that always involved 3 or 4 different people just because one person got a new graphics card. Because their old graphics card maybe wasn't good enough for them, but it was better than what somebody else had. And their graphics card was better than no graphics card. And it's always this like multi-step affair every time any little piece changed.
Trickle down IT-omics. Yeah, I practiced a lot of that in my earlier days as well. I will never forget walking into a mall in North Charleston, South Carolina, when the original XCOM UFO defense game dropped. And the little PC store in the mall had some PCs doing a demo mode of XCOM UFO defense. And I stopped dead in my tracks that window and stared through the window for like 15 minutes and walked in and said, okay, I need to know what I have to make this game run. And the answer, as it turns out, was basically a whole new computer, kid. What do you think you're going to get accomplished with that 286 you got at home? But it wound up being, just the piece by piece like stream of upgrades, some of which didn't entirely fit in the original, beige box chassis for my 286 clone, and reassembling a couple of computers out of the e-waste that, then went further down the circle of like, I don't know, like what adjective do you even use? It's not really less fortunate friends. It's not even necessarily friends with less money. It's just less technically capable or whatever.
Yeah.
I suppose now it's a case of just whole machines being passed down to people until they just end up in landfill or, well, being responsibly recycled, let's say.
For the most part, it's been trending that way for a while. I can't tell you how many times I've had people ask me for something as simple as like not even a real malware infestation, just like they had a website with an ugly pop-up that pretends to be malware. And they're like, should I just go down to Best Buy and get a new laptop? No, you shouldn't. We should just fix this issue. But that's what normal people tend to do. They use a thing until it's broken, and then they go get a new thing to replace that broken thing. Even paying somebody else to repair a thing for you is less convenient than just buying a new one.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Brad writes, unlike setting sysctls for ZFS, doing ZFS set commands do not seem to affect existing data. This includes changing record size. I was considering changing the pool compression from LZ4 to Z standard, as well as changing the record size. I understand that record size requires a CP, move, or rsync to actually make the changes take effect. What about changing compression? Does that require a ZFS send and receive? And is it even worth the effort?
So the first thing I will say is most of the sysctls only affect newly written data as well. Like you change a sysctl, the pool might not even be imported, so it had no way to go and change something because you changed the setting. But in general, in ZFS, once data is written, it's there, and it's not going to change until you touch it again. So in ZFS 2.4, the newest version, there is now a ZFS rewrite command specifically for doing this process of rewriting a file in place. So you can point ZFS rewrite and point it at a file, and it'll do the equivalent of copying the file, deleting the old one, and moving it back, but without the file ever going away or losing any of the metadata about it, or even changing all the file names and so on. So with that, if you change, ZFS set compression equals Z standard 8, and then do ZFS rewrite on one file, or use the recursive flag to do it on a whole directory or something, it will go through and recompress all the blocks of those files to the new compression, and it'll save you a bunch of space.
Because if you've got an existing pool, right, that has got LZ4 and a bunch of files on it, they're compressed with LZ4, then you change to Z standard, all the old files will still stay LZ4, but any new files will be Z standard, right?
Not files, in this case it's records. So if you change a file, the part you changed will be compressed with Z standard, and the part you didn't change will stay LZ4.
Right.
And it'll just be anything you write new will have the new setting. Record size is special because one file can only have a certain record size, it means any file that exists will have its old record size and keep using it, but any new file will have the new record size. And specifically, that ZFS rewrite command can't change the record size of an existing file for that same reason. So the way it works right now is it goes through each record one at a time and redoes the settings. So that lets you do, change the checksum, change the compression, apply or unapply dedupe, and things like that. But because it does it iteratively, one little piece of the file at a time, you can't do that for the record size because the whole file has to have the same record size the whole time. And so it doesn't work for that. But the rewrite command can make it easy to apply different compression or checksums or any of the other settings except for the record size.
Although, I have to warn you folks, be careful with this. You need to think about your replication chains. If you're wanting to change the compression or the record size or what have you on a replication target and you use ZFS rewrite, it's just going to get nuked the next time you've got inbound replication from the source. If you use ZFS rewrite on the source to change compression or record size or what have you on your entire data set, and then you do another incremental replication to your backup target, well, guess what? It's going to move every single block of data because you changed every single block of data.
So there's a caveat for that one. So there's ZFS rewrite -P, which only changes the physical copy of the data and specifically leaves the birth time of the logical block so that when you do ZFS replication, it won't think the file has changed because you didn't actually change the contents, you just compressed it differently. So it causes it not to get re-replicated. So at least you won't send the same data you already have to the backup, but you're right, it won't update the backup to have the different compression, but it does mean just because you went and recompressed everything on the primary doesn't mean it's going to all have to be re-replicated.
That doesn't help you if what you wanted to do is change the compression on the target though, correct?
So yeah, if you want to change it on destination, then yeah, it won't help you because the big caveat with rewrite is obviously it kind of grows all your snapshots, right? It's actually all new changes. And so most of the time you're going to have to delete your snapshots to use rewrite effectively. And so that will break your replication chain, especially if you try to do it on the destination. There's just this one caveat where you can do it on the source in a way that won't cause the data to be re-replicated, but obviously the setting won't change on the destination. But it is a bit easier than having to manually copy, move, or rsync the files around if you just want to change the compression specifically.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joerest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.